So let me now move on to General Puri. So in the month of May 1998, you took over command of 8th Mountain Division. 8th Mountain Div was then part of the valley. Your headquarters were located at Sharifabad. And you were largely looking at the year 1998. So when we look back at that year, a year prior to the Kargil operations, we recall that both India and Pakistan conducted the nuclear tests. So the Indian tests were on 11th and 13th of May, and I think 2 weeks later the Pakistanis also came up with a set of detonations that they said that they were one more than the Indians. We did 5 detonations and they did 6 detonations. That was also the year that when we saw the rise of Taliban in Afghanistan. And as Taliban grew in Afghanistan, we also had a very large influx of foreign terrorists in Kashmir. And they were called as FTs. When the FTs entered Kashmir, 2 things happened. One, they brought in a culture of an idea of IEDs, improvised explosive devices. That was a time, for the first time, we had IEDs coming into the valley in a very large scale. And the second thing they brought in were the famous ICOM sets. Okay. So, when you look back, well, that particular year, 1998, was all about insurgency, was all about militancy, was all about, all that what was happening on this side of Zozila Pass. So, what was as a GOC of 8th Mountain Division, what was your reading of the broader strategic context? Did you ever think that a year later you'll be moving to the other side of the pass?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank Mr. Darshan for getting us over here. Admiral Arun, Prakash, I've always been an admirer of yours, sir, in uniform as well as in the civil street. And Principal, Madam Sangeeta Ken, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Now, it's always a privilege to be talking to you. And now, getting back to the question which I've been asked, I took over 8th Mountain Division in March 98. Now, at that time, the insurgency was well under our control. I'll talk about the nuclear aspect a bit later when we discuss subsequent issues. The insurgency was well under our control. We had seen the highs of it in the early 90s to mid 90s. And if you recall, in 1996, the elections were held in J&K and an elected government was in place. That is the National Conference. So the political situation was quite congenial and comfortable as far as conduct of military operations were concerned. But like Harinder just mentioned, the Afghanis had started coming in, the foreign terrorists had started coming in. While we had control over the valley, we had control over the local population, but we had no control over these foreign terrorists who were coming in. And somehow they had developed a very intricate and a very intelligent system by which they could communicate with each other very effectively. The communication setup had technologically improved considerably. And there was generally the feeling in all our contacts with the terrorists that there were more foreign terrorists than the indigenous ones. Just to give you an example, there were about, I think, if I go as per the ratio, there were 70% of foreign terrorists and 30% of the local terrorists. Now, the local terrorists, whoever was there, are very effective programs of winning the hearts and minds of the population, were producing tremendously good results. Now, if you see the history of the valley and the culture of the valley, the women play a very, very important part. The children, the mothers, they have an absolute control over the household. And wherever we were sort of engaged in anti-insurgency operations, or when a contact had been established, whether they were foreign nationals or whether they were indigenous foreign terrorists or indigenous terrorists, they could get a safe a safe harbor in these houses, local houses, and these women used to protect them. So if the security forces went into an operation, they would make a sort of a ring around the security forces and impede any progress of the operation. So effective programs to win over the hearts and minds of the people were having tremendous, we were getting very good results because of that. And I think that was before 98, the emphasis was on that. A lot of programs had come up, bridges had been made, roads had been developed by the army. Sadbhavna operation was launched in a very big way, where army schools had been opened, and these created a tremendous amount of goodwill amongst the local population, and that is how the intensity of the operations had reduced considerably. But what was very dangerous for the security forces was the creation of the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices. One just didn't know where this could pop up. And what was the impact of this on conduct of military operations? That every road which had to be traversed, we had to commit a lot of manpower in keeping the road communication open. Because IEDs could just be planted anywhere on the roads. So the road opening parties, from morning till evening, we were making sure that the roads were kept open, the communications were kept open, and that was generally what the state was. As far as terrorism was concerned, we had just to give you an example, before I came, the division was having about 400 to 500 terrorists killed per year. That's a very large number. But when we came, we had about 200 to 250 was the maximum which we had in that particular year before Kargil. So really what I'm trying to tell you is that we had gained superiority over the insurgents and the terrorists, and the situation was well under our control by the time the Kargil operation had started.
So, sir, as you explained that the militancy was in a way ebbing off, so then what we now want you to explain us is what were the larger Pak motivations then to intrude into Kargil? Also, that as I said earlier, that the peace dialogue was already on. Prime Minister Vajpayee had led the bus yatra to Lahore, and then that was followed by the signing of the Lahore Declaration. And post that, there were a lot of interactions taking place at the diplomatic level to settle matters to an extent. So, one is that there was peace looking beyond the horizon, but then you had this clique of generals who were plotting for different reasons to intrude into Kargil. Now, people say that Kargil was done in a way to internationalize what was otherwise happening in Kashmir, on one hand, or it was to take a revenge of all that what happened in Siachen in the years before that, okay, or for the reasons that there was a kind of a nuclear parity between India and Pakistan at that point of time, that the Pakistanis felt that they had that space to push India on that count. So in your view, what would be the motivation? What could have been the motivations? And how would you rank them in that order? What was most important and what was less important?
I think basically Pakistan, right from the time of independence, has considered J&K as an unfinished agenda. They lost the war in 47, 48, then came 65. They got it was a draw, but more in our favor than in theirs. Then you had the 71 war, which broke the country into two parts. A new country was created. Then we had Siachen. Now, when I told you about the situation in the valley, it was the type of normalcy which was being returned. The Pakistanis, they wanted to inflict the insurgency on us on the religious grounds and inflict 1,000 cuts on us. And it was a well-planned, well-orchestrated sort of strategy to change the mindset of the local population there. But when they found that we had gained some supremacy in the valley, normalcy was restored, then they had to do something else. Also, along with this, the international, the Committee of Nations had not, the Kashmir issue was not any longer on the radar of the UN screen or any of the other international forums. So they had to recreate this and internationalize the J&K issue. A very important aspect in their overall strategy was to change the alignment of the line of control. And you see they used Indus River as an obstacle in the eastern part of Ladakh. And on our side, they used the national highway. So they wanted to capture maximum area north of these two major geographic features and change the alignment of the line of control. And that was during the summer months. If we had not succeeded, they would have consolidated the gains. Come winter, heavy snowfall, roads closed, and in the next campaigning season, it would have been well nigh impossible for us to evict them. So these were some of the issues which were, I'm sure, playing at the back of General Musharraf's mind. And that is why he started this operation, notwithstanding the politics which was going on at that time, where the Prime Minister had visited Pakistan in February. The Lahore Declaration was signed. But still the planning for the Kargil operations had commenced more or less simultaneously. And that is where, I think the nuclear aspect which you mentioned, the 98 May nuclear explosion by both sides, they thought that by capturing a sizable amount of an area in a surprise operation, they would then get the international community to put pressure on India. Because of the nuclear parity between the two countries and the nuclear threshold not being crossed by either of the two countries, the West would put pressure on us for a ceasefire and thereby Pakistan claiming all the areas which they were captured. I think this was the broad strategy in which they were working.
We'll have one more question, sir. In your book, for those who have not read his book, Kargil, Turning the Tide, I think you must read that. That's a very interesting read at the operational level. In that book, sir, you write at one place where you say that you were on a short holiday at Bangalore when General All, who's sitting here, that you gave him a call that the formation is now being asked to move from Kashmir Valley to Dras Kargil sector. So as GOC 8 Mountain Div, to move a mountain division, which is about 16,000 or 18,000 men and X thousand vehicles and all that, to move them from one sector to another sector, what were the challenges that you have in terms of mobilizing your division, in the reorientation of the role that you had? You were here involved in a militancy operation, and now there's something else that is coming up there. And then also, you move into a new area. You by that time, I think you also knew as to that the larger intelligence was lacking, and you were required to undertake some kind of eviction operations there. So how did you, in a way, kind of take these big planning challenges that you had, or hurdles that you had to yourselves?
Yeah, Harinder, I think the issue of the basic challenge, which was of the terrain, has been well covered by Raveen. So I don't want to repeat that, all the issues which he's covered about, the high altitude, the impact of the high altitude, and how difficult it is to negotiate heights. And, remember that the soldiers had to move with about 25 to 30 kgs on their back. this was a very, very difficult task to expect a soldier to move with that type of weight at heights which are varying from 12,000 to 18,000 feet. So, and the soil is so loose in these areas that if you walk one step, you go down 2 steps. There's scarcity of water or right on top, whereas the soldiers had to then resort to melting snows for their water requirements. So these were some of the very major issues as far as the topography was concerned. Now, as far as the communications were concerned, we had only one highway in which 3 infantry division had to be sustained for their winter stocking, as well as the Leh garrison had to be sustained, as well as Siachen had to be sustained. So there was one road access, that is the national highway. And about 80% of our stocking used to be done on this highway. The Upshi Manali, which Raveen had mentioned, this was still, the infrastructure had not developed on that highway, with the result that only about 15 to 20% was the type of traffic which was moving on that. On top of that, you had 8 Mountain Division. Now, 8 Mountain Division came with its integral RT, which was not adequate. So the reinforced artillery, the Bofors came in, and we were short of artillery, and we were seeing the dominating heights on which the enemy was occupying his defenses. And that is when General Lakwinder came up with this idea of innovation. I mean, he took the Bofors gun, which had just got inducted into the sector, and he used it in a direct firing role. Now, normally it's a high angle, artillery is normally used in a trajectory role, but here he used it in a direct firing role. And this one single sort of a innovation changed the concept of the employment of artillery as far as the Bofors were concerned. Bofors was, if you remember, a maligned gun. Besides the cost, it had cost a government. And, but I think the advantages which we got out of this were tremendous. And it was a battle-fairing factor as far as the land operations were concerned. You'll hear more about it when the syndicates touch on this. Now, the other major challenge was the mindset. Changing of the mindset is very important. For years, right from its raising, 8th Mountain Division in the east was dealing with Nagaland. Then they came to J&K and they were dealing with the insurgency. So their mindset was totally oriented toward counter-insurgency operations. Nobody was worried about conventional operations. And I remember when I was in Sharifabad, the higher command course came, and one of the students asked me a question. He said, how long would you take, in case you're required, I was the command reserve also, how long would you take to respond to a conventional war? So I said 3 months. I hope it's got nothing to do this with my talk. Huh? Okay, I said 3 months. But so I said 3 months. But just within 6 months of that, I was inducted into Kargil with just about a week's notice. But, so the mindset of the entire division had to be changed, changing them from, and I think the commanders, and the commanding officers, Yogi Joshi is here, Brigadier Admiral is here. Then later on, the vice chairman came with his para brigade. All these were add-on factors which added to the sort of success of the operations. And when the division got inducted, we gave them time, I didn't want to rush into the operation. I said there should be adequate time for us to prepare, because hastily done operations were costing us heavy casualties. We had not acclimatized, so our high altitude casualty list was up to 60% in a battalion. So these were all very demoralizing thoughts. So we deliberately took about 12, 13 days to acclimatize, prepare ourselves for the battle, refine our battle procedures and battle drills. And that's how we got the ball rolling. Leadership was another important aspect. And I think our young leadership, that stood us in tremendously goodwill. They are the ones who were responsible, young leaders, young officers. Then you had these two Param Vir Chakras whom you saw. They were the ones who really gave us the victory which we finally got. And here in leadership, I just want to again, I often give this incident about how leadership can transform battle operation. I was, after the capture of Tolaling, 13 Jackrif, which Yogi Joshi was the 2IC, they were moving to Saharanpur, they were recalled, and I had to push them up as for the next phase after Tolaling. So Yogi Bakshi was there, and after the first successful operation, we were all on a very high. The Prime Minister was to visit us, but my headquarters got bombarded by the enemy in a very heavy way, so we had to cancel that visit. But nevertheless, when I went to the brigade headquarters of Amarall, the CO of 13 Jackrif was moving around over there, and I said, "Why are you here?" He said, "I'm pushing my stuff up." I said, "You should be on top." So he said, "Sir, I'm not well and all." I said, "Okay, you go to the hospital." And Yogi, I rang him up. I said, "I'm sending you your badges of rank. You've approved for a lieutenant colonel. You wear your badges of rank, and from now onwards, you're the CO of this battalion." And to his credit, he transformed the complete mindset of that battalion from a very mediocre battalion which was operating in counter-insurgency operations. They got the bravest of the brave at the unit citation of the Chief of the Army Staff. And many other units also did likewise. And why I wanted to highlight this incident was basically to tell you how the junior leadership and the middle level leadership transformed the entire conduct of the war. It is to their credit and their credit alone that we got the victory. And I think they were the brigade commanders who were suffering the privations of the COs and the men. They were right up front. And I think it was an excellent team which finally produced these results. And I think that was basically the...
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I had a couple of questions for General Raveen as well. But since we are short on time, we are open to questions now. So we'll take about 3 questions at a time. And the speakers to just get up, give out your name and the school which you belong to. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. I think one thing we can, I'm Hans Barish, I'm from Welhams Boys School. I'm in grade 10th right now. I think one thing we can all take away from today's talk is that when you were climbing these terrains, you had to go through great physical difficulties and even technical difficulties. You had no cover, you had to deal with constant gunfire. What I want to ask you here is that even if a person has that iron will, even if a person has that determination to complete the task for his nation, how does he or she overcome the fear of death in those instances?
Yeah, good question. Now it's directed directly at me. The GOC has a bit of a role in making sure that he runs a happy team. He gives the resources where they are required. He allocates the tasks to the people, and he goes and talks to the people and interacts with them. Resource management is the most important thing for a person at the level at which I was operating. Which battalion to send, when to send, how to send, what is the administrative logistic backup which is required, how to produce these resources, how to manage the environment in my particular area, that is how to manage the senior headquarters, because sometimes the pressures do come on you. So you don't want these pressures to go down, permeate down to the lower level. You want to make sure that the buck stops at your level, and the subordinate commanders are not unnecessarily taxed as far as these pressures and all are concerned, though there were not many pressures which were put on me. But nevertheless, I myself had my own internal pressures, but I made sure that I didn't pass them on to the subordinates. So I think, by and large, the GOC has a large canvas to cover. And yeah, he's not firing the gun, but he's the man behind the gun.
Okay, next question.
Use the mic, please.
Good morning, sir. I'm Kargil Singh from RIMC Dehradun, sir. Recently, I was reading a book named Dispatches from Kargil, written by Sanjoy Chaudhary, sir. Over there, I learned that I read that once Indian Army captured point 5353, over there they got some register in which the dates mentioned were February 1998 and about March 1998. So does it indicate that the Pakistani army had carried out a smaller scale incursion in the year 1998, and they checked that if the Indians caught them or not? And because if they were registers such as for pay scale or just normal register, then why will they bring it to war?
Okay, okay, please sit down. Now this point 5353 is something which came, which is an issue which has not been totally resolved. I think, it is something which keeps cropping up at regular intervals. Now 5353 is a very, very dominating feature in Dras. If you see the description of this feature and relate it to the delineation talks and the delineation of that area, you will find that 5353 comes a bit onto the Pakistan side. Now, our reservation, I didn't mention about the challenges. Our reservation was that we were given the terms of reference of not crossing the line of control. And for any operation, if we had to capture 5353, which Brigadier Admiral was absolutely ready to do, but we had this reservation of crossing the line of control, and therefore we couldn't capture it. But in all topographic maps which you see, we had the Roltas give a presentation to the Defense Minister also, where this feature comes onto the Pakistan side. But you're right, as far as, they didn't start intruding in February 98, but definitely towards the winter of 98, early winter of 99, the intrusion would have started. And they were pretty well prepared as far as the stocking was concerned, as far as their defenses were concerned, in all these areas which they came and occupied over a frontage of 135 kilometers.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.